Welcome to the Virtual Speaker Series. This is the first episode of Winter Quarter 2021 here at Cal Poly. My name is Adian. I use to pronounce he, his, and him. And today we're talking about Asian Pacific Islander Desi American identities, or APIDA identities, and how they're related to masculinities. Joining us is Winston Chang. Welcome, Winston, and thank you for being here.
Hi, Adian. It's great to be here. Yeah, my name's Winston. I use male presenting pronouns, he, him, his. A little bit about myself. I'm actually a Cal Poly alumni. I used to work for the same program that Adian's working for, Men and Masculinities. I was a psychology undergrad. I did a lot of the workshops, presentations, and stuff for M&M, and I'm very passionate about Men and Masculinities work.
I am too. A lot of those are actually commonalities. I'm also in psychology right now.
This is actually my final quarter, so I'm
Oh,
really excited.
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
But just on that topic of psychology, I always like to ask people who are in psychology, what prompted you to pursue that?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I personally went into undergrad as a business major because coming out of high school, I was in a pretty competitive area of high school. A lot of my friends were wanting to become engineers, doctors, very like stereotypical Asian parent pressure kind of career fields. And I was also grew up with a lot of those pressures, just being in that social environment. You're just kind of very strongly influenced by your peers, right? So I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I figured, hey, business sounds good, so I'll just start and try there. So I started in business, but after a year there, I just was not enjoying it, or just really not feeling it whatsoever. Was not having a good time. But after an introductory psychology course and spending some time with some of the psych professors, just talking to them one on one in their office hours, I realized, like psychology is really cool. It really spoke to a lot of my personal interests. It was something that I really connected to, and so I made the switch.
It's funny that you say that because that's a lot of the thought process that went in my head. I went into Cal Poly as a food science major, realized that it wasn't really for me, but I always had this interest in psychology. I was like, I want to do what intrigues me. What I have a passion for. Outside of career path wise. Um,
Hmm.
You know,
and just so our viewers kind of like get a better idea of who you are and what you're doing. What are you working towards right now? Now that you're in this kind of it's a bit of a shaky economy at the moment.
Yeah, I'm actually after I graduated Cal Poly, I applied for a doctorate in counseling psychology and got rejected. So after that, I applied to master's programs in counseling, and so I got into the master's in counseling psychology at CSU Fullerton, and I'm now studying to be a counselor, which is pretty much like therapy services, mental health, that sort of thing. Yeah. So I'm working towards that right now.
Well, congrats on getting accepted. I know that's always kind of a moment. I feel like for a lot of psychology students, they graduate and they're like, "What am I doing now?" And yeah, definitely that is definitely a way to go. And counseling is a really interesting field. And I feel like when we're talking about male masculinities, when you're counseling male identifying students, that really comes into play there because that's going to influence how they interact with the world around them.
Most definitely. Yeah. Masculinities, men, and mental health, definitely a big topic right now. A lot of questions like why don't men like to seek mental health services at the same rates as other populations? Why do guys find it so hard to ask for help? And outside of just men and masculinities in general, kind of what are some of the factors that might be influencing APIDA men or general populations?
Right. Yeah. And on the topic of PETA men, especially because that is the topic for this episode. Um, yeah, we're talking about like kind of how what your experience has been, just generally. But when I'm thinking about identities and cultural identities, especially, that has a huge influence on our decisions, how we interact with the world around us. So I was wondering if you could share maybe a little bit about how your cultural identities have influenced your journey as an individual, and how that has kind of like changed your perspective on what it means to be a man, or maybe, what that cultural identity brought to your development of being a man.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I think before going into my personal experience of that cultural and racial identity influence, I think it's really important to recognize that, like, when we're talking about this big umbrella term APIDA, right? That's Asian Pacific Islander Desi American. That's a that's a big old umbrella, and I'm just here in like the Chinese American Californian male presenting little section of that umbrella, you know. So I just want to preface this with, like, when I'm sharing my experience, it really is just a small, super small slice of what that huge umbrella term could look like. And APIDA is a huge population, and the individual experience is always going to be different depending on culture, location, socioeconomic status, religion, everything. Yeah. So just that preface. But personally, yeah, grew up Chinese American, which I think a lot of students at Cal Poly might resonate with, that kind of hyphen American identity that growing up with cultural and personal expectations at home with your other friends who share your same cultural identity, but then going to school, hanging out with other friends, and then being in this totally different kind of cultural or social soup, right? So for me, at at home, there was definitely a strong expectation to be academically proficient, extracurricularly proficient, very much like setting yourself up to go to a good college, good career, whatnot. But at school, there was this very different expectation from you know different friend groups in terms of what we would do. So like among me and my other Asian friends, we'd talk about hey, like sometimes some of my friends were really talented musicians and they wanted to go into music, and that didn't always fit well with kind of the home expectations. So I think navigating that home life but also social outside life expectations and learning how to navigate those within yourself is one of the hard parts that a lot of these hyphen American or kind of like bicultural identities have to figure out.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that you did preface that with like you're not a figurehead for all of PETA identities, because that,
Yeah, no, too
Absolutely.
much pressure.
yeah, it's absolutely an important thing to mention though, because yeah, we're not saying like this is what every person who identifies as a PETA is. Like, we're not saying that at all, but like, yeah, but I feel like a lot of people can relate to, the similar experiences you have, especially that idea of like family pressure, because that, even for me, that was a huge influence in like how I decided to go to college, why I decided to study. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, how has family influence when you were like growing up? How has that influenced you differently from when you're more independent when you're on your own? How have like other people who have identified similarly to you influence your projection for the future?
Well, I think a common theme that you can notice or recognize in a lot of Apita cultures, backgrounds, the families, I think, is this strong idea of collectivism and kind of like loyalty to your family. This very much idea of like when you're making decisions or thinking things through, how it impacts your family definitely tends to hold a lot of weight in a lot of Apita cultures. So speaking from my own culture, I think in Chinese culture, the idea is referenced as like filial piety, which is basically the idea that you take care of your family, like the kids take care of their parents. The parents are kind of like more respected or honored, right? But the the part to navigate, I think, especially for a lot of these Apita identities, is the consolidation of that more historically and traditionally influenced cultural baggage with the present reality of, hey, like now that I'm off at undergrad, I'm at Cal Poly. This is a predominantly white university. The social and personal expectations look a lot different here. A lot of people are playing on different expectations, or they've been raised on different ideas than me. And so how do I fit in here? Do I want to fit in? Do I give up this stuff, or do I hold on to this and maybe feel different, and what's okay, what's not okay? There's definitely a lot of, I think, anxiety and change that goes on for a lot of students. And so that's definitely one thing I remember a lot of, is just wondering of like, what is right, what's not right.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned earlier that APIDA is like an umbrella term. It kind of encapsulates a lot of different cultures and ideas and perspectives. Do you think when you go to college, you also mentioned there's kind of that anxiety that develops when you have kind of challenges to your beliefs or the structures you followed in the past? Do you think having an APIDA identity that's so broad maybe forms community that can possibly alleviate some of those stressors of change?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. I think that's a fantastic point, honestly. I think one of the best things that APIDA students, or just even cultural minority students, racial minority students can do in general, is find community. And community doesn't just 100% have to mean that that the people there look exactly like you, they think exactly like you, but find people who you can be yourself with, who you can bring all this background, this history, this you that you are bringing to college, and find people who can accept that and see that and like love you for that, rather than hear you say it and they say, oh, that's interesting, cool, and then never talk about it again. And it's not to say like you can't, like, of course you should have friends and you can have friends with everybody, but like I think it's definitely important to find a space where you really feel safe and comfortable enough to be celebrated for who you are, because you couldn't be anything else.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great response because I know you mentioned this that Cal is very white. There's no denying that. So a lot of times, even just looking around a classroom, you might feel a little separate or isolated just because of the presentations of other people. It can be hard to like identify with that. Um, so yeah, it seems like maybe finding just a cultural connection, even if it's like a smaller one that allows you to preserve yourself is a good way to adapt to that college life. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I love that response because I feel like when you have incoming freshmen, a lot of times there is that concern about finding a group, finding people you can identify with, and I hope that kind of alleviates any of the stressors that potential freshmen may be experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, heck, even regardless of your cultural or ethnic identity at all, I think most people come into college a little, not even a little, quite scared in general. It's a totally new environment.
Yeah, I mean, but even moving beyond college, I want to kind of take a step because you have graduated, so you're kind of back in the real world, if you will. Yes, you did it. Congrats. I mean, I'm still holding on, but I hope I can do it too. But you know, we're moving into the unprecedented area in terms of having. I mean, we're on a Zoom call right now instead of doing this in person. We're in quarantine. The economy is looking a little shaky. There's been a lot of political change. Um, thinking about that, and you're a Chinese American. I was wondering, kind of how do you think that identity has been uniquely impacted by all these political considerations?
Man, that's a big question. I think two things really come to mind in terms of if we're talking about Chinese Americans and politics slash society in the U.S. right now. Man, big question. But two things come to mind. I think A is just the recent kind of surge in anti-Chinese sentiment in the U.S. And I think regardless of whether or not it happens every day or it happens once a week, I think just the mere fact that the presence of incidences arise is the important part, because it doesn't have to happen to you personally. Like, I was in Atascadero like a month and a half ago, I think, just walking downtown, and this one dude on a bike was just biking past, and then just yelled out some nasty slurs and just like really really caught me off guard, because like that's not something that you don't expect something like that to happen every day. But I think the real sinister part of that is that it really disrupts your sense of safety, and I think it's something we all really take for granted. So I'm sure there's a lot of Chinese Americans out there who, you just hear about something happening, you might have seen something on the news, something might have happened to your friend, and it just makes it that much more unnerving to walk down your street. Like, you should be able to, but now you just have that slight urge to look over your shoulder, and you're just that little bit of less safe in your own community. And I think that's the real sinister part of it, is that people can say, well, oh, look at the stats, it hasn't happened, like not that many crimes have been reported, this or that, right? But it's really I think the mental effect it has on a community of just sending the message that, hey, you don't feel safe here.
Yeah.
I think
I'm
that's the
really sorry to hear that. Actually, that's yeah.
yeah. Thanks, man. That was, yeah. It's not fun.
No, yeah, no, absolutely. That
Yeah.
feeling of a loss of safety, especially where you live, is really hard to overcome. And just being brought to your conscious that racism is still uh, very much alive. There's been a lot of
Hmm.
instances. When President Obama was elected, people were like, "Oh, now we're in a post-racial kind of country just because we have an African American black president."
Yeah. But of course,
And
we know it doesn't work like that.
no, absolutely not, because then we have a president elected after that who, obviously is almost inciting uh, it, racism against Asian identifying individuals.
Hmm.
In a lot of ways, I feel like people see this previous election with Biden becoming president as another indication that we're post-racial, but that's not true, and that will,
That's a dangerous trap to fall
yeah,
into, right?
because it's that false sense of security that we
Yeah.
can stop making movements towards addressing racism.
Yeah.
And,
It's this idea that racism could be solved with like a declaration or a simple change, when I mean, like, when in reality it's just this very deep pervasive part of human nature to an extent, it's goodness, it's I do believe that everyone has biases, and the important part is learning how to recognize your biases, and then choosing, like using your faculty as a human being to say, hey, like, I recognize I didn't get to choose the way I grew up. I didn't get to choose the media that I was exposed to. I didn't choose the messaging that I was told as a kid, but now as an adult, I can actively do the work to recognize, learn the history, and then take proactive action. We
yeah,
don't get to choose the biases we're given as kids, but we definitely have quite a bit of choice as adults, and as young adults as well, like how to how to how to proactively work against that, I think.
I think that's a great suggestion to kind of work towards individually. Everybody can work towards, addressing racism in their own lives, even if it's unconscious biases, even if it's just discriminative thoughts that are in our minds. Being able to look at it and be like, oh wow, why did I think that? Why did I like look at this person and become uncomfortable, or like why did I step into this elevator and feel unsafe? It's like things like that where we're just like constantly like evaluating our responses is really a great way, just on an individual level, to kind of address that problem.
It's
um,
gaining that awareness, but then also finding the courage and like the bravery to learn how to sit with that uncomfortableness, because I'm sure a lot of people's first responses is like, oh, like I feel uncomfortable, something must be wrong with them. It's like, I'm not racist, it can't be me, right? But learning how to say like, oh goodness, like, why do I have these thoughts, where do they come from, and then saying, oh shit, I don't like that, and then choosing to say like, I need to work on this for me. And
Right.
it takes courage, I think, to make that decision.
Yeah. That willingness to be uncomfortable even with
Yeah,
yourself.
to recognize that, hey, like maybe I am unhappy with something that's ugly about what's in here, but I also want to change that.
Yeah, yeah, and you're giving a lot of great suggestions right now. I didn't intend it to go this way, but this is great. It actually leads me to a last point I wanted to bring up with you, and it's given your experiences, given your identities, given your journey through Cal Poly and otherwise, um, I would like to ask you personally, what kind of words of wisdom or what information would you like to share with Cal Poly undergrads or incoming freshmen or just people in general who hold like similar identities to you, what should they understand, what should they know, anything like that.
Mm, yeah, don't eat yellow snow. That's the first one. But I think a piece of advice that I really stuck to for a long time through undergrad was authenticity. That idea of be yourself. That's something that I really stuck with for a long time. But it wasn't until a bit later, I think, later in undergrad, that I kind of learned the second part that comes after be yourself, which is admit when you're wrong. So 100% being authentic, being yourself is, I think, just personally, I think it's humanistic fulfillment. I think it's a wonderful thing to pursue, but I think the time when that idea of being yourself and being completely authentic becomes dangerous is when we don't know how to own up to our mistakes, when we are being ourselves and something about us we don't like ourselves, you know? So if I'm me and I'm being pushy with my friends and I'm saying, "Oh, they just can't handle me, like I'm just a lot and they're they're not loyal enough to deal with me." At the same time, there might be a point there where I need to ask myself, am I okay with this? You know, do I just want to keep saying, do me, do me, do me? Or at what point do I want to ask myself and really take that step of willingness to, be honest with myself and say, hey, I'm not sure if I like this either. And that's a really hard step to take.
Yeah, no, that's great. Especially I feel like that applies to college a lot when people, you know, are really unsure of who they are. Like they want to be themselves, but they don't even know who that is. So I think being authentic to yourself, being in touch with yourself, and being evaluative of yourself are really really crucial characteristics. And I'm glad you brought that up because I think people can take a lot away from that, especially people who are kind of feeling lost or uncertain at the moment.
I think that's all I have for you today. I want to say thank you so much again for coming here
Yeah,
and
my
talking
pleasure.
to me. A lot of insightful stuff. Definitely didn't mean to talk about all of that, but I think it's all important anyway. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Adi, and thank you very much for having me.
Well, that's all we have for this episode. If you want to learn more about the Men Masculines program or the Men of Color Success Initiative, make sure to check out the links down below for our Facebook, our website, or our Instagram. You can also use those links to find out when we'll be having programming and events available. Also, consider subscribing to this channel. With that, I'd like to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time on the Virtual Speaker Series.